organization, how do they feel about this land swap?
Well, we have taken a position of opposition to the NYCO land swap on the basis that it would set a terrible precedent, removing forest preserve to benefit a private international corporation. This is not what the constitutional amendment process was established for. There's never been any constitutional amendment permitting the benefit to a private international corporation from what are lands that have been protected for the people to be forever wild. So we're very concerned about the precedent, and we feel it is not in the best interests of the park and the forest preserve long term.
So to touch more on that and to go deeper into it, why is it not a good, how is it going to hinder the forest preserve?
Well, the forest preserve was established initially in 1885 to be forever wild for the free use of all the people of New York State. To remove significant acreage of forest preserve in a land swap deal that instead benefits the bottom line of one corporate entity, which is non-public, which is private, in this case international, would be an anathema to the constitutional protection under Article 14. So this is not a precedent that the people of New York State should allow. There have been land swaps in the past, but they have always been for the public good. Land swaps, for example, swapping lands to add to a municipal cemetery that was needed in, for example, the town of Keene, adding to a municipal airport to extend a runway, which was critical for a municipal airport. These sorts of things, a water supply provision for the town of Racket Lake. These are appropriate, limited, narrow uses of the constitutional amendment for removing lands in a very limited fashion for municipal purposes that makes sense, and the people of New York State have supported those actions. But this is a very different, the NYCO deal is a very different animal. It is a private corporation that has other lands that have demonstrated Wolastohnite holdings. The state has other procedures to support local or international business, which it can apply if it seeks to buttress the bottom line of this corporation. But we only have one forest preserve, and if aspects of it become of interest to international mining conglomerates, as in this case, and then pieces of the forest preserve get removed because of their mineral value, forever wild doesn't mean forever anymore.
Oh, that absolutely makes sense for sure. So what would be your response to what NYCO is saying, which is that they're one of the largest, corporations that is giving employees in Lewis and Essex County, jobs? What is your response to that? If it doesn't get the land swap, apparently, it cuts their amount of time being in business by about 10 years.
Their estimates pale in comparison to the value of the forest preserve for clean water, fresh air, wildlife habitat, recreation. That is the main driver of jobs and income park-wide. And again, it's not just about a one-shot deal here. It's about our concern is principally about the establishment of one of the most serious precedents of constitutional amendment for the forest preserve in the history of the forest preserve since 1885. The other point is the lands in question are old-growth northern hardwood forests, which are biologically rich. These are tremendous bear habitat lands. These are lands that have a combination of ecosystems that are relatively rare in this old state in the eastern Adirondacks, or anywhere in the Adirondacks for that matter. There are a number of species that demonstrate the richness of the site. Very large basswood trees, 24 to 30 inches in diameter, rising 90 feet in the air. Old growth sugar maple, old growth beech covered in claw marks from black bear because they provide critical food. The site also includes some of the largest vernal pools, which provide critical habitat for rare and in some cases endangered species of salamander and frogs and things that provide tremendous ecosystem benefits that make this park special. So even the site alone, this is not just regular woods. It's extremely rich site, old growth northern hardwood forest. It's the exact kind of site ecologically that we would want to protect at all costs to stay in the forest preserve. And we hope the people of New York State will do that by voting the NYCO amendment down.
What would be your alternative, I guess, for NYCO, obviously, to not have this land swap go through? You know, is there an alternative for them, or is it, you know, it does really the benefit of making sure that the forest preserve is really preserved is more important than, I guess?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that the employees of NYCO gain a benefit from these lands. These are lands they hunt, these are lands they fish, these are lands they can recreate in, and these lands do provide the employees of NYCO a benefit, and all the residents of the park in Essex County in particular. In terms of providing incentives or strengthening the access to mineral resources of NYCO, they have the Oak Hill property. They have other properties that they have yet to exploit. The fate of those properties is not in question. So that's where they should be focusing their expertise and their business acumen, not in going into the very small Jay Mountain Wilderness area and carving out a 200-acre parcel that will become visible across Lake Champlain, that will destroy sensitive and rare northern hardwood old growth habitat, impact deer and bear habitat, and other unique ecological resources. That's not the right trade. The precedent is dangerous, very dangerous for the forest preserve, because what would happen next year if rare earths were found under the high peaks? Would we allow another amendment to be put before the people of New York State to mine in the middle of the high peaks? That's wilderness too, and that's also forever wildlands. So it's a very slippery slope that's being proposed on the amendment in November. And we feel that both on policy and principle, under Article 14 of the Forest Preserve, the NYCO amendment has to be turned down by the voters. We also feel that the state of New York, under the Department of Environmental Conservation, should never support a constitutional amendment for this purpose. We don't feel it's their authority to be advocates for this kind of activity, and even if that was acceptable, and we don't believe it is, but even if that was acceptable, they ought to know what they might lose in this swap. They've provided the public no information about the richness biologically of this site, about its impact if it were mined, all 200 acres, 5 stories deep on the watershed of the Boquete River. None of the ecological, biological, geophysical, or watershed characteristics that might be lost, or that will be lost if these lands were mined, have been assessed by the Department of Environmental Conservation. And that too is quite a shame.
And that was going to be my last question is, you know, they're saying in the land swap that obviously they're giving up more land to just take this smaller amount of land, and then give it back to the state. So even if they cover all their mining up, it's really not going to be the same as if they had just not touched it.
Well, the history of mineland reclamation, both in the park and nationwide, is a very poor one. It gets about a D on the grade scale from A to F. You can't remove 200 acres, 5 stories deep, into the native geology and expect to see that restored in any sense of the word equivalent to forever wild lands. Those lands will be scarred for 100 years, 200 years, probably well over 1,000 years. The fact is that the lands that are being offered, if they have value under the state's open space protection plan, which is a process where stakeholders get around the table and decide which lands are valuable based on certain characteristic, recreational potential, biological diversity, wildlife habitat, connectivity with existing state lands. A number of factors have to be looked at. Well, those factors haven't been evaluated under the state's open space plan. The public committees haven't met to talk about whether or not these tracts are worthwhile. I can tell you this, they are not as rich, they will not be as rich by any shape or form as the 200 acres of Lot 8 that include old growth northern hardwood habitat that cannot be found in very many places in the Adirondacks. It's extremely rich, it's biologically diverse, it plays a critical role in watershed and wildlife and recreation today, and it's supposed to be doing it forever. That was our commitment to those lands and to the people of New York State, and that's what we need to keep centered on.